Hello student, this video lecture is prepared for the heat transfer subject and I will discuss the unit number 5, that is known as the heat transfer equipments. In the previous lectures, I had discussed about the different types of shell and tube heat exchangers, and in that we have already discussed the fixed tube sheet heat exchangers. Then today's lecture we will discuss the fixed tube sheet 1-2 shell heat exchanger and removable bundle heat exchanger, that is known as the floating head heat exchanger. So let us start the lecture. So this is the fixed tube sheet 1-2 shell and tube heat exchanger. So I have already told you that 1 is stand for shell side passing and 2 is stand for tube side passing. So in these heat exchangers there are 2 tube sheets and these tube sheets are welded, which serve as a flange for the attachment of the channel and cover. And one side of the shell channel is used with the pass partition for the entry and exit of the tube side fluid through it. So here I will show actual figure. So this is actually figure of the fixed tube sheet 1-2 shell and tube heat exchanger. So in this heat exchanger, if we look at this part, there are 2 tube sheets which is welded to the shell and which is act as a flange, and on the one side of the shell channel, so this channel cover or channel is provided with pass partition. So this is called a pass partition, and this is used for the tube side entry and exit of the fluid. On the other side of the shell, so this side, the shell cover is clamped to the tube sheet. So by using nut and bolt, this shell cover is clamped with the help of nut and bolts, and it is used for the permitting the tube side fluid to cross the first to second pass. That means it will, tube side fluid is coming from this side, it will go through this tube and again it will goes in this direction and it will exit from this nozzle, and the shell is provided. So this shell is provided inlet and outlet nozzle. So this is the inlet nozzle and outlet nozzle for entry of the shell and shell side fluid. So one fluid is passing through the shell, another fluid is passing through the tubes. So in this heat exchanger, the shell side fluid, that means this fluid is flowing 1 times through the heat exchanger. Okay, so this fluid is flowing in this direction, gives the heat or take the heat, and then it will goes in this direction, and the tube side fluid is passing through these tubes from here, give the heat or take the heat, and then it will goes in this direction in co-current or counter-current fashion. Okay, so this is the working of fixed tube sheet 1-2 shell and tube heat exchanger. Note that in previous case there is a fixed tube heat exchanger, but it is having 1-1 type. That means it is, this is 1-1 type and this is 1-2. Okay. Then there is another heat exchanger which is called a removable bundle heat exchanger. So these type of a heat exchangers are used for removing the tube bundle from that heat exchanger. That means that tube bundle, we can say, suppose this tube bundle can be removed from this shell, because that is not happening in a fixed tube sheet. So here we cannot remove this because this is welded. So for that purpose you have to use the removable bundle heat exchangers. And why we are taking the tubes outside? For cleaning by brush or forcing wire into that tubes. So by doing this we can clean that tubes. and also we can check that tubes where it is having any leakage. Okay, and sometimes by heating the stresses are developed in the shell and tube, and it will lose or loosening the tubes from that tube sheet. So for that purpose there is a removable tube bundle is provided in some heat exchangers. So I will show the figure. So it is called a internal floating head heat exchanger. It is called internal floating head heat exchanger. And what is the purpose of this heat exchanger? So as to make the removal of the tube bundle possible. That means this tube bundle can be removed from the shell and allow for a considerable expansion of the tubes. A floating head heat exchanger is used. That means stresses are developed due to the heating. So that stresses are minimized in this floating head. So this is actually the figure of that internal floating head heat exchangers. So here the tubes are fixed in a floating tube sheet at one end. So this is the floating tube sheet, and in a stationary tube sheet at other end. So this is the stationary tube sheet. Okay, the stationary tube sheet is clamped between shell and channel. So this is clamp. Clamp means we are using the nut bolt. Okay, then the floating tube sheet, that means this tube sheet, is clamped between floating head and clamp ring. So here is the ring is provided. So that ring is clamped with this floating head. The clamp ring, this clamp ring which is split, that means it is dismantled into the half to permit a dismelting in placed at the back of the tube sheet. So I will show this figure. So if we look at this split ring assembly, so here is the tube sheet. This is the split ring. That means this ring is split into two parts, and then we can, by clamping, we can attach this tube sheet with this floating head. Okay, so the tube sheet is kept slightly smaller diameter. So if we look at here, this is having smaller diameter than the inside diameter of the shell. So this is the shell diameter. So floating, it is having smaller diameter. So why? So by providing the smaller diameter, we can withdraw or we can take out this entire tube bundle from the channel. So you can take this tube bundle. So this is called a tube bundle. So you can take this tube bundle outside. The channels is provided with inlet and outlet connections. So these are the channels. So these are the channel are provided inlet and outlet connection for tube side fluids. So these are the tube side fluids. Okay. The shell cover at the floating head end, that means this end, is larger than the other. Okay, so this shell cover is larger to compare to the other heat exchangers. The tube sheet along with the floating head is free to move. So this is free to move so that it can be take account of the thermal expansion between shell and tube. So if the thermal expansion is taking place here, it will move free. So it will account the thermal expansion. And what is the use of this heat exchanger, or we can say the advantage? The tube bundle of the exchanger is removed for inspection for mechanical cleaning. So this tube bundle can be removed from the tube sheet, or we can say from the shell. It eliminates differential expansion problem. That means due to thermal expansion, there may be chances of loosening the tubes from this tube sheet. So that can be avoided in this internal floating head heat exchanger. Okay. And where this type of heat exchangers are used, it is widely used in a petrochemical or chemical industry or petroleum refinery. It is also suitable for the duties, that means for useful for high pressure and temperature with dirty fluids. So suppose we are having dirty fluids, means sometimes the fluid is having liquid plus solid, like that, or sometimes water is having some dirt. So that can be also handled in the floating head heat exchangers. And high pressure and high temperature we can use, because if we use high pressure or high temperature, there may be chances of thermal expansion which is taking place here. So that can be minimized by using the internal floating head heat exchanger. So this is the construction of the heat exchanger, and obviously in working you have to just add the shell side fluid here. Then it will move in this direction and it will giving the heat to the other fluid which is flowing through the tube side, and that fluid is removed from this side, and the tube side fluid is passing through in this direction. It will change their direction and it will again go through these tubes and it will exit from this heat exchanger from this nozzle. Okay, so in this way the shell side fluid and tube side fluid is flow through this heat exchanger and giving or absorb the heat through the tubes to each other. So this is the actually construction and working of the internal floating head heat exchanger. Okay, so the remaining part, it is baffles, pass partition, channel covers, is as it is, and their function is as it is. Only the difference is here. Here one is a floating tube sheet and another is stationary tube sheet and floating head, and this is the shell cover. So this type of heat exchangers are generally used in a chemical industry, petrochemical and refinery, and high pressure and high temperature, or you can also use in a dirty fluids. So here I want to conclude today's lecture. So in this lecture I had discussed about the construction of fixed tube sheet 1-2 heat exchanger. Then we will discuss what is meant by, or what is the necessity of removing the tube bundle from the heat exchanger. And then I had discussed about the internal floating head heat exchanger construction and working. So remaining part we will discuss in the next lecture. Thank you.